Welcome back to the FITSNews studios, everybody. Will Folks, your founding editor and the host for the Week in Review. We've got a ton to cover this week, folks. We're going to introduce you to the newest member of our team. Our Andy Fancher is going to sit down with an anarchist. We're going to address one of the most critical healthcare issues confronting South Carolina and the country. And I'm going to sit down with our Jen Wood for a huge update on multiple true crime sagas that we're covering, as well as some big judicial issues here in South Carolina. So for that, now we're going to go to Jen Wood, our research director. Jen Wood, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Doing great. This insane story we keep covering, the Micah Miller story, it's become almost on that Murdoch level. The attention, the interest, everyone just so focused on it. We think that it's died down, but all of a sudden just right back up again. Here we are. And the latest, this insane interview with J.P. Miller on News Nation. And we're going to get into JP in a minute and whether or not some of the issues that he's displaying could have been a result of abuse that he endured. But before we do that, Jen, let's talk a little bit about this bizarre interview with News Nation. You watched this thing. Tell me some of your takeaways, Jen.
Yeah, I did not want to watch it. I've watched so many of his sermons that, I'm just over listening to him talk. But when I got the teaser email from News Nation and watched the clips that they sent out, I knew I had to. He was saying some very interesting things. And it wasn't just interesting, it was easily, and I've said this a number of times this week, the most bizarre thing I have ever watched. It was it was almost frenetic, the energy. It was up and down. Rich McHugh, the reporter for News Nation who conducted the interview, said, he's done thousands of interviews over his career, and this one was the strangest. And he said he felt like he was on a roller coaster for the entirety of the interview. And that was the perfect description.
Yeah, talking about the contents of his vomit, and at one point, just bizarre stuff. But Jen, let me ask you this. Obviously, J.P. Miller, somebody who has earned, by virtue of his prominent role in this story, the derision of millions at this point, given some of the allegations against him for abuse, harassment, not only of Micah Miller, but as we're learning, allegedly of many others. But let's talk a little bit about him, because some folks have said that we've been unfair in our coverage of him and that other folks have been unfair. They're arguing that this is behavior that may have been learned behavior or behavior that may have been something from his childhood. Let's first assess it, and then let's talk about whether or not is that any sort of excuse here. Jen, is the learned behavior thing, is that a legitimate argument?
It's something that comes up often in abusive relationships. But, whether or not that gives him an excuse, it should make you feel sorry for him. It is a choice that, he allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly because, it's a choice that he allegedly made as an adult to continue, the cycle of abuse. So, yeah, I do. If he did experience abuse, which has been alleged in the affidavit submitted by his ex-wife in their custody case, if he was indeed abused, that is very sad. I do feel bad for that. But, I also feel bad for all of the victims that followed that were also victims of this cycle of abuse.
Right. And I have tried to stress to those who have been critical of our coverage that we are not dealing with just allegations pulled out of the air. These are multiple repetitive patterns that have been attested to by numerous people in court documents. And again, maybe they're all lying. We don't know the exact truth, but, these are not allegations that are fictionalized or pulled out of the air. These are allegations that have credible bases in court filings from multiple sources, again, all attesting to very similar behavior. Jen, as the story goes forward, one of the things that I've found fascinating, and again, we were the first to report on Micah's death, on the bizarre way in which Pastor Miller announced it, which is frankly one of the reasons this story blew up the way it did. But Jen, in covering this case, you've been one of the lead reporters on it. Also, Robbie Harvey in Myrtle Beach, he's been one of the guys that's been on this case from the beginning. And the two of you sat down with R. Kelly Lyons this week, didn't you?
We did. So Robbie's actually based in Florida, and he said that he covers a lot of cases regarding women in instances of abuse and coercive control. And he actually said that he found out about this case from our video and our coverage initially of that bizarre announcement that he made regarding Micah's death. So it was a very interesting conversation. And Robbie's somebody that in the course of covering this, I've connected with just because we have a lot of the same sources, and it's been very interesting to watch him cover this case.
Yeah, well, actually, let's hear from that because that was a really interesting interview between you, Callie, and Robbie. Let's cut to the clip of him talking about what it's been like for him to cover this case. Here's Robbie.
I think the scary part is the world doesn't even know everything that myself knows. And I know Jen knows some things that the world doesn't know. We haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg. And that's what's terrifying about this. And how, if everything that the Francis family accuses John Paul of it is true, and how could someone get away with something like this for decades is just beyond me. And I think multiple people, in my opinion, should be held accountable for what has happened. Again, once the public knows everything that allegedly has happened over the past several decades, they'll no longer ask who pulled the trigger. They'll simply know why the trigger was pulled, if it's all true. And it's truly heartbreaking. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it wears on you. But there's no other option. You have to keep going and keep uncovering the truth. And that's what this is about now.
All right, Jen. So obviously, the interest level in this story continues to be off the charts, and we are going to have news from the Micah Miller saga this coming week. We're going to be in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on Monday of this coming week, the 29th of July, for a hearing in Horry County Court. Walk us through, Jen, what is this hearing about? What is on the table as far as the family of Micah Miller, lawyers for J.P. Miller? What should we expect at this hearing next week in Conway?
So, in the aftermath of Micah's death, as with anybody who dies, a estate was opened in Horry County Probate Court. And very soon after her death, her sister Sierra Francis applied to be special administrator of that estate. So really right now we've got two cases ongoing. We've got a family court case that was initiated before Micah died, because she was, had begun the process of divorcing John Paul Miller. And then we've also got the probate court case, which was opened after her death. So with the family court case, the family's arguing that, Micah's intention was to divorce John Paul Miller. And in the process of divorcing, you're going to split your assets up. But in order to go ahead and proceed with that divorce, Sierra Francis has to continue being the administrator, conservator over Micah's estate. So they're going in and arguing that case, and arguing, they're trying to, make sure that the assets are preserved. So recently, John Paul Miller had filed a financial declaration in family court. So they're going in to, make sure that those things are set up so that they can proceed with the divorce case to divide the assets up. And, where those assets would go, because right now, John Paul Miller is Micah's next of kin. So even if the divorce were to go through and the assets are divided, would they go back to him? So the goal is really to get Micah's family appointed so that her assets come to them.
Right. And let's not forget that in some of those initial court filings related to this probate case, not only did we hear initially of these allegations of harassment and abuse involving John Paul Miller, but there were also some allegations of moving assets around in anticipation of the divorce proceedings. Remember, John Paul Miller served with divorce papers 48 hours before his wife's body was found. A lot of folks say that is not a coincidence at this point. Again, No evidence to say it was otherwise, but again, a lot of speculation revolving that. Count on FITSNews. We're going to be covering that hearing, but also, Jen, we're going to be sitting down with the attorney for the Francis family, for the family of Micah Miller, Regina Ward. We're going to sit down with her and hear what she's got to say about this case. We're going to talk with her not only about the hearing this coming week, but also about that bigger battle regarding Micah's Law, a push to update the Palmetto State's domestic violence statutes to incorporate more elements of coercive control. We had a huge segment last week on this show with Lauren Taylor. She really broke down some of the elements of this proposal to expand those domestic violence statutes. Jen, what are you looking for in that conversation with Regina Ward, and what are you looking for particularly as it relates to the coercive control angle of this debate?
In talking to Micah's family in the aftermath of this death, it was heartbreaking hearing what they said that they saw her going through. And I know that, and I've talked to them quite a bit, and I know that Micah didn't want all of this attention. It was part of the reason that, she had held off on pulling the plug on the marriage. She didn't want, to be in the spotlight. She didn't want everything to blow up. But I think now they're really looking to having something good come out of Micah's death, having a legacy. And, these laws are controversial, but I do think some aspects of them are very necessary. I've talked to a lot of victims of coercive control, and it's hard to prove. It's hard to get police to take seriously. And with Micah, the system, to me, it failed her. It failed her horribly. She kept calling the police to report trackers on her vehicle. Her tire had been destroyed numerous times with tire deflating tools. She was clearly going through a lot, and every time the police would say, this is John Paul owns the car. There's nothing we can do. So I would like to see at least some laws enacted protecting women from this kind of behavior. I would love to see what Regina and what Micah's family plans to do to keep this momentum towards the legislation going.
Well, there certainly is plenty of momentum on this issue. Certainly there were bills introduced in the South Carolina General Assembly during the last legislative session. We're going to keep track of any bills that are introduced in the coming session. Obviously, the clock starts on new legislation, starts again in 2025. It's the beginning of a new 2-year session. So all bills from the previous year, this year, are out the window. We'll have to start from scratch, but we'll be very interested in following that debate. Jen, let me switch gears with you now. I want to talk a little bit about the latest developments in the Murdoch saga. We referenced it earlier as the story that literally won't go away, that continues to generate headlines and attention. We've been talking in recent weeks about Alex Murdoch's big appeal, his effort to have the Supreme Court revisit Justice Jean Toll's decision not to give him a new trial. We talked extensively about that in the last couple of episodes, but I want to ask you about these 2 resignations that we learned about this week from key agents of the State Law Enforcement Division, the 2 agents arguably who were the top 2 agents on the Murdoch case, David Owen and Ryan Neal. Jen, are these retirements of these 2 investigators? Is there anything suspicious here, or what did you see when you reported on this week?
Both Ryan Neal and David Owen have had long careers in law enforcement. David Owen has had 27 years within various departments throughout South Carolina, ending his career at SLED as, the lead investigator on the Murdoch case. And Ryan Neal's been with SLED for 33 years. So they both had met the mandatory minimum retirement age for police. I don't think anything necessarily, I don't feel anything suspicious was coming out of it, but it was very quiet. You didn't see any big announcements. I remember thinking you didn't hear from SLED much in the aftermath. You saw a lot of interviews, from the AG's office, Creighton Waters, those involved. But, the SLED investigators pretty much remained quiet in the aftermath, and that might be why they were half the team of the lead investigators were heading towards, retirement. That was their swan song.
Well, your story pulled no punches, Jen. This was a look at that trial that, in many ways, while obviously securing a guilty verdict for now, anyway, obviously there's some questions about the integrity of that verdict that are lingering, but it did secure a guilty verdict. But in the process, it did expose some glaring issues with the investigation of these crimes. And Jen, your story, laid those out pretty bluntly and barely for all to see. I want to ask you about this. As you look at the integrity of the investigation, the integrity of those verdicts, what concerns you more? Do you think the integrity of the investigation or the integrity of the verdicts that were ultimately reached in its aftermath?
Well, I have to say the integrity of the verdicts is very concerning, in that, SLED is very involved in the investigation into the potential jury tampering. But, the integrity of the investigation, going into that trial, we knew that Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, we knew they were pushing back on the investigation just based on the blood spatter evidence, the filings relating to that report that had come back from the investigator in Oklahoma. But when
They
David
shredded
Owen,
that blood spatter.
yeah,
They shredded that.
Shredded. I mean, it wasn't even factored really into the verdict. But, there were a lot of things when David Owen took the stand that just continued to come up, and Jim Griffin's cross-examination of him was damning. They did not secure the house at Moselle in the aftermath of the murders. There were people all over that house. And that house was clearly a part of the crime scene because Alex was back and forth between the kennels in the house. They had the steps going back and forth. They had the timing, but that house was not secured. They didn't search his parents' house in Alameda where he went directly, after he said he last saw Maggie and Paul. They didn't search that for months.
Yeah, where he allegedly stashed the guns for a period of time, according to the narrative of events.
There were just so many things that I think were not done correctly. And, do I think it was because of the power of the Murdoch family? Absolutely, 100%. I think they gave, the Murdochs and their family and friends, the run of that house because I don't think anybody wanted to tell them no. So yeah, I think I had a lot of questions. I still have a lot of questions, and I'm disappointed in the integrity of that investigation.
Well, I did kind of throw you a trick question there because I think you pointed out the integrity of the verdicts could lead directly to a renewal of questioning about the integrity of the investigation. Because, Jen, if what we believe is going to happen ultimately transpires, and Alec Murdoch is given a new trial either by the state Supreme Court or the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals on the basis of Judge Toll's decision earlier this year, we're going to be revisiting all of these questions regarding the integrity of that investigation. I'm sure that's not something SLED is eager to have happen. Maybe that's one of the reasons the agency, the Attorney General's office, are so aggressively safeguarding those verdicts. But again, Jen, as we've talked on innumerable occasions, this case no longer about Alec Murdoch. It's just about the rights of everyone in the state of South Carolina to a fair trial. As we continue in that vein, Jen, of South Carolina's judicial system and the inherent corruption in it, which we had hoped the Murdoch saga would root out or at the very least hold accountable, we've got to talk a little bit about another judge, a judge in the Charleston, South Carolina area, former judge now, thank God, Bentley Price. Jen, this is a guy, the poster judge for lenient sentences, unconscionably low bonds, just a guy whose modus operandi seemed to be, let's see how many violent criminals I can put back on the street, particularly violent criminals with a history of abusing women. This is a guy that literally during his tenure on the bench was the poster judge for all of these judicial leniency scams. Jen, walk us through the very latest with Bentley Price. He's off the bench now, as I mentioned, but what are you hearing regarding this contemptible judge out of the South Carolina Low Country?
Bentley Price, he had gone up for in front of the Judicial Merit Selection Committee and over the fall to retain his seat as a circuit court judge, and they found him unqualified. So he, pulled the plug on his application, stepped away, leaving his term to end in, I believe it was June. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. So he had 6 months left on the bench after he was found unqualified, which I think is very interesting. And Dylan did a great story on one of his final decisions before he stepped off the bench regarding Walter Clayton Pate III in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bentley Price, he's the poster judge for leniency. And once again, with this case, as Dylan reported, he showed his true colors. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, Pate, a former Marine accused of handcuffing a 19-year-old victim to the bed, tying them with ropes, sexually assaulting them. His own roommate apparently vouched for this account, and apparently he allegedly attacked his own roommate who tried to break this thing up. But while incarcerated on one set of charges, another alleged victim came forward, yet Price lets this guy go. And Jen, not to pick on a common theme here, but shocker, Pate's lawyer is a lawyer legislator, Gil Gatch, who throws a hissy fit in his court, similar to a hissy fit thrown by attorney Leon Stavronakis, another lawyer legislator. And sure enough, Bentley Price agrees to let his client go. I mean, and it's not just us criticizing this, by the way. There have been articles in the Charleston Post and Courier criticizing this. A lot of folks have gotten hip to this and started calling out just the sheer inanity and I would argue reckless endangerment of public safety by this judge, but consolidates his bond. And then when the state comes back with clear and compelling evidence that not only do they have additional evidence they're looking at, but that they're probably going to charge him with additional assault charges, he still lets him go. I mean, have we ever seen anything like this, Judge?
No, never. And I was talking to the sister of a victim that I did a story on. I believe it was in March. Heath Watkins, who was murdered in 2020 during COVID, and Bentley Price gave him. I think he ended up with 11 years. I mean, he's going to be out in 2 years when all is said and done. And, I was talking to Heath Watkins' family, who is just, beside themselves. Their brother was shot by somebody, and they're going to end up serving like barely any time for this. And she pointed out, they want to file a complaint with the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. But in terms of, he's not even on the bench anymore. He's not a judge. So what kind of punishment can they even dole out? I mean, she said it's fairly, from what, the people working with her on this have told her, it's fairly unprecedented that a judge sits on the bench for, 6 months after they're found unqualified.
And continues to issue rulings like this that
Right.
are clearly endangering the public and individual victims. It's just unbelievable. And Jen, real quick to point out, it's not just lawyer legislators who are standing up for this guy. He's had a bunch of influential lawyers supporting him. In fact, Mark Tinsley, one of his BFFs. I think it's important to point that out. A lot of these righteous crusaders have got some strange bedfellows, to say the least, Jen. But as we talk about Bentley Price, thankfully he's off the bench. Hopefully we can get some accountability for the trail of absolute carnage left in his wake. We go back to the shooting of that canine dog in the aftermath of another violent offender that he let out. Just unbelievable, a trail of carnage. But as we talk about Bentley Price, one of his enablers in the legislature was Judiciary Chairman Luke Rankin. And this media outlet broke a big story this past week on an effort by some South Carolina state senators to oust Rankin from his post as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, an incredibly powerful role. We have been digging into this story. It's unclear exactly who is on which side. Apparently, removing him from the panel is not easy. It would require the Senate to actually amend its rules regarding seniority of members and their ability to pick their committees and assume leadership of those committees based on seniority. But Luke Rankin clearly in the crosshairs as it relates to a push by some of his members. And Jen, it's oddly enough not any of the gross negligence we've seen from the judges he appointed, but it's other members who are unhappy with him, refusing to move their bills, refusing to communicate with them about their bills, just basically being a lazy chairman is what we're hearing. Jen, let me get your thoughts on Luke Rankin before we go.
I think, it's fairly obvious that things aren't moving. Things aren't moving. It's frustrating. People are frustrated with politics. People are frustrated. Nothing's getting done at the state level. And for his committee members, senators to see this as well it's concerning. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I actually learned a lot. I had no clue that he used to be a Democrat.
Oh, used to be. That's one way to describe it. I think a lot of folks in the Republican caucus would argue he still is, but at any rate, Jim, we're going to try to get him on camera when we go down to the coast this week covering this big story on Micah Miller. But I also want to point out Micah Miller, her law, ultimately that would end up going through Rankin's committee. And I know that Regina Ward and a lot of folks have been less than thrilled with his lack of receptiveness regarding that legislation. So maybe we can get him on camera to talk about it. Something tells me he might not go on camera with me. But Senator Rankin, you name the time and place, I'll be there to ask you questions about your record. In fact, Senator, I'll give you the questions in advance. You can study them and try and see if you can come up with something to say in response to them. But at any rate, open microphone. It's open to Luke Rankin just as it is to anybody else. Jen, can't thank you enough. We covered a lot of ground in this segment. We got a lot of stuff coming up this week. You will be here in the Palmetto State this week. Can't wait to get you here. And Jen, just thank you so much for your work on all these cases.
Thanks for having me, Will.
So one of my favorite parts about running this media outlet is watching it grow. This website literally started in my garage. It was like a labor of love for many years, but over the last couple of years, it has begun to turn into a real media outlet. And over that time, we've had the privilege to welcome a number of folks to this team. But today is a very special day because I wanted to introduce the newest member of our team, Erin Parrot. Erin, you're kind of our inaugural intern, but I wanted to ask you first, before we get into the stuff you're doing here, all the work you're doing here at FITSNews, what attracted you to our media outlet?
Well, growing up in Greenville, my stepdad had always followed Fitz and had always tweeted, republished stuff, all that, everything. And so he got me in contact with Fitz and was like, you might as well just shoot them a direct message and see if they're having interns or anything. And I was like, okay, I didn't really know much about it. And then I started looking at some of the articles, and I liked seeing that everything was it had opinion to it and had its own style of writing and not just the factual writing that I've been learning in school. You can kind of have the freedom to write what you want. So I sent you a DM and asked if y'all did internships, and then we met, and here we are.
You know, one of the coolest things is that Dylan Nolan and Jen Wood also slid in my DM. So this is kind of how to get the gig, apparently,
I didn't even know that, but that's
Isn't that
awesome.
cool? Mm-hmm. Isn't that cool? The best people, that's how they find me.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. You're studying at the University of South Carolina, actual J school. You're in J school.
I am.
Tell us about your program, what you're learning, what you're studying.
So I came into USC as a broadcast journalism major, and I'm still doing that. I've got 1 year left. So at this point, I'm kind of learning more of the whole broadcast side, which is a little bit less of print, but I have been learning print since my first semester in 2021. So next semester, I'll be doing journalism classes of all kinds, whether it's broadcast or print. So I know I'm learning more of the basics of broadcast, but working here, I'm also learning more of the print side too.
Yeah, you've been doing both and doing excellent work on it. Tell us, what's some of the stuff you've been covering here for us?
So started out writing mainly just strictly sports, and then as the summer started and I didn't have classes, I started doing sports and then breaking news, and then I've also done some DNR and animal stuff, reported about the alligator season coming up, and I enjoy all of it. I always thought that I really wanted to just strictly do sports and didn't want to do anything else, but then once I got on like the media list for everything and started doing some of those breaking stories, I ended up loving all of it. So I really don't have a preference of what I write. I enjoy all of it. I love sports because I grew up playing sports. I grew up going to football games, baseball games, all that stuff. But I enjoy every aspect of it.
Well, we have loved having you. You've been doing great work all summer. Looking forward to having you continue on in the fall semester. But let me ask you this. We're talking sports. We got to be honest here. We are both, you're a University of South Carolina student. I'm a University of South Carolina graduate 2 times. We're Gamecocks.
We are.
We're Gamecocks, and that doesn't always translate into bragging rights. In fact, rarely against our rivals up in Clemson. But
Yes.
we cover these programs impartially. You know, we cover them fairly, Clemson and South Carolina. But let's talk about this upcoming season. Obviously, South Carolina coming off a 5-7 year, a disappointing year, did not make a bowl. Clemson coming off, by their standards anyway, a disappointing year, a 9-win season. It was the first time in a dozen years that they didn't win at least 10 games. Heading into 2024, let's go ahead and baseline it. What's your prediction for South Carolina 2024? How many games are they going to win, Erin?
So looking at ESPN right now has South Carolina going 6-6. And I'm a diehard Gamecock fan. I don't know if we'll go 6-6. I've heard previously that we were predicted to go 4-8. But now it's up to 6-6, and we're projected to be 33rd ranked overall.
Oh, wow.
So I really think it depends on how the practices go and the preseason goes, and then what our first game looks like against Old Dominion at the very end of August. I'm hopeful, but it's hard being a Carolina fan. It is, and then playing Clemson at Death Valley this year in Clemson territory. I'm not sure if it will be 6-6 or if it will be another upsetting 5-7.
I'd hate to go into Death Valley having to make it 6-6. That would be a tough atmosphere to win that game and get bowl eligible. Obviously, we had a chance to get bowl eligible against Clemson at home this year. Weren't able to get it done. Erin, let's talk a little bit about Clemson, though. You've been covering the Tiger program extensively this summer. You've written a couple of great articles about what's happening with Clemson football and the ACC. In fact, you had a report out just this past week about how Clemson's basically indicated they're going to stay in the ACC at least for the next 2 years. But what's your sense about this conference realignment and Clemson's future? Do you think they'll be in the ACC for the long run, or do you think they're going to try and make a jump?
I think they would like to make a jump because Clemson is dominating the ACC, them and Florida State. And that's why Florida State also has been talking about wanting to leave the conference too. But from what I've gathered, it seems like the SEC and even the Big Ten don't necessarily want Clemson in the conference, either one of them. So I don't know if they'll make the jump or not. Based off all the legal problems they've been having since March and continue to have with the ACC, could see that they would want to leave it, but I'm not sure if it will actually get to that point where they actually will.
You know, when they're stiff-arming the conference wanted them to move that Carolina game to Black Friday. Clemson said no. And actually, I kind of, let's take our fan hats off for a minute. I kind of respect what Dabo Swinney had to say about, listen, this is good for the town. Saturday is where they make their money. This is a huge day for the town. Didn't want to move it. I kind of respect him putting the interests of his program first.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, in Clemson, the whole town basically is the college. So, like, during football season, most of the attraction is the football games. And whereas he was like, if they want to do it in Columbia on a Friday, that'd be different. But that's because with the University of South Carolina being in Columbia is so big, there's more than just the college. There's the actual city itself. But with Clemson, like they said, they get most of their revenue on Saturdays. I do respect what Dabo Sweeney said because it is what's best for Clemson and
It's
their
not hard
fan
for you to
base.
say that.
It's very hard for me to say that. But no, I mean, being impartial, I do think that any college football game is just better played on a Saturday. And especially considering that gives students time to travel because they're going to want to go to the rivalry game. I know I want to go. And then families and people coming out of state, and people have to work on Fridays too.
Yeah.
So playing the game on Saturday and staying in Clemson is what's going to be best for both teams.
So let's look at Clemson and their upcoming season. You predicted, by the way, I noticed you got out of that prediction. You said ESPN said 6-6. I want to know what Erin Parrot says for South Carolina. What's your prediction on our record?
I don't think we'll go 6-6. I think we're probably going to have a losing season. I really hope we don't, but I just don't see with some of our best players like Xavier Legette leaving and Spencer Rattler leaving, I don't necessarily see us dominating the schedule in the SEC, especially since we have one of the toughest schedules in college football.
Yeah, fourth toughest schedule in the country.
Exactly. And I just don't think I think we are still a pretty new team, and I think Shane Beamer's still a pretty new coach, getting to know his team and everything. And I don't think we will have the chemistry to necessarily dominate this season.
So
I hope I'm wrong.
5-7, 4-8.
I would say I'm going to be hopeful and say 5-7.
That's my pick, by the way.
I would say
5-7
5-7 again.
So Clemson, looking at their schedule, obviously much easier than South Carolina's by virtue of the fact that a lot of those ACC opponents not quite as tough as the slate that you get in the SEC. What do you think Clemson ends up at this year, Erin?
I think they still will have a winning record. Based off last year, I'm not sure if they'll actually go with 10 wins or not. I'm predicting probably around the same as last year, going, I think it was 9-3.
Yeah.
Right? I think probably around there, 9-3, 8-4. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to beat Clemson this year in Death Valley like we did 2 years ago. But I do think Clemson's record will be much better than ours.
Yeah, I think heading into that rivalry game, it's a safe bet. Clemson will have the edge as they typically do. But again, miracles happen. Obviously, you referenced that big upset in Death Valley 2 years ago, one of the biggest wins of the Shane Beamer era. Erin, as you continue to cover these programs and follow these programs, just got to give you some props. You have done an amazing job of doing, like you said, an impartial job. And I know that we love to throw our opinions around at FITSNews, but you've done a great job of really covering these programs down the middle. And also, I got to give you props for your work on our true crime stuff, folks. This young lady has come in, taken breaking news, literally hot off the presses, turned it into great stories. So I hope I'm not selling you too hard. We don't want these other media outlets to come
Well,
and get
thank you.
We want first dibs on you. But just amazing work, Erin. Can't
you.
thank you enough for being part of the team. And just so excited you were willing to come on the show and introduce yourself to our audience.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to be here. I love it, and I don't plan on going anywhere. So I enjoy everything I do here. I like the confidence and the freedom you've given me to do everything, especially since I haven't finished school and I'm still learning as I go. I'm enjoying every bit of it.
Real quick question to get you in a little trouble with your professors. Where are you learning more, at school or here at FITSNews?
Well,
Don't answer that. We don't want to get you in
That
trouble.
depends because I mean, at school I'm learning broadcast. Here I'm learning
Yeah.
more print.
Yeah.
But honestly, I mean, in the way that I go about reporting things, I would say it's fairly even. There's just different teaching styles. Learning from you versus learning from a professor.
Well, hey, and in fairness, we got to give USC some credit. I did graduate from their journalism school, so technically, you're learning from USC at the institution and from one of their graduates. So there you go. But you're doing great work. We're super grateful to have you on the team. Hope you'll stay for a long time, Erin.
Well, thank you. I hope so too.
Here at FITSNews, we've built a proverbial empire on disrupting the norm. And right now, we have a candidate out in Kershaw County running for chairman in a special election who, quite frankly, is doing just that. His name is Jeff Maddox, and right now, the South Carolina Election Commission considers him the first candidate in South Carolina history to be so openly supportive of anarchy. Jeff, thanks for coming into the studio. First and foremost, what are you all about?
Well, it just so happened in the little rural Kershaw County, South Carolina, you know, right outside of Columbia. We've had, I've been an advocate for smaller government, limited government for years and years at county council. And recently we had a county council chairman, the first female council chairman ever, resign less than half of her term. And I had some people come to me and have been watching what I've done on YouTube and those kind of things and the ideas that I promote. And they asked me to run. And I said, look, I don't want the job. I don't want to rule over you. I don't want all this. And they said, well, we need somebody that will have a voice, that will talk about natural rights and talk about self-government and talk about limiting government. And
so what you had were people reaching out to you, very familiar with your YouTube channel, your purportedly nearly 500 offensive videos where you talk about anything from COVID-19, or I suppose what YouTube let you post during the COVID-19 pandemic, to our local government level here. But I mean, you know, we can't shy from the fact that you are an anarchist.
I am an anarchist.
And the anarchist philosophy is no government. So it's kind of an interesting situation here where we have somebody who's an advocate for no government running for a government position.
It does seem awful ironic, doesn't it? And I think it's kind of funny too. But if we're going to have a voluntary society, and anarchy means a voluntary society, most of what we do every day in our lives is anarchical. It is voluntary exchange of goods and services. We can pick and choose to give these people business or not these people business. We talk about bad businesses and good businesses, and the market works like that in a voluntary basis. But as it is now, we have a monopoly on violence that rules over us, that dictates to us.
Now, you speak a lot on this monopoly on violence. I mean, what are you referring to here? Are you referring to our U.S. Armed Forces, to our local law enforcement? What is this monopoly on violence?
The state itself. The state itself claims a monopoly on violence and takes from you to give to others. They call it taxation. Let me ask you this. Can you take from me? Can I
take from you?
Or do you have a right to take from me?
Well, of course not.
Do I have a right to take from you?
Of course not.
Well, where in the world does government get the right? If we don't have those rights, how do they get the right to take from us? Mm-hmm. Is it scribbles on a piece of paper? I don't understand all that. And so to me, the reason that everybody gets these weird ideas in their head when the word anarchy is spoken, you know, bricks going through walls and chaos.
I mean, yes, this is a philosophy that's been associated with ACAB movements, with Antifa, yes, with the bricks going through the walls.
Yeah.
In fact, you type in anarchy, you see a cop car on fire on Google.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very violent approach, and perhaps that's a reason that we don't see so many people, at least in government level, supportive of such a philosophy.
And if you think about it, our founding fathers and all wanted as close a voluntary society as possible. Now, they talk about if men were angels, we would not need government. But at the same time, we know men are not angels, and so they are attracted to power. And so if you give an institution a monopoly on power, no matter the chains that are put on it by the Constitution, you know those chains have been broken, have been shattered, and we got the biggest Leviathan ever in the history of the world, that biggest empire ever that rules and dictates over anything and everything. no wonder they don't want a voluntary society.
So are you suggesting we've become dependent, complacent upon this leviathan that is the U.S. government, something that praises itself as the most number one government to the most number one country on the planet?
And they always want you to sing the song and pledge the allegiance. And just think about it. Look at what we've done over just the last 110, 120 years. The things that we've let government take responsibility for that we would have been responsible for ourselves individually before. Look at that. 120 years ago, they started public education. Now, I don't think of it as public. I think of it as government. I don't think of it as education. I think of it as indoctrination.
But I mean, it's not to say that we're not going to learn our 1, 2, 3s and our ABCs at this government-funded, government-provided education. And it's not like we're the only country doing it.
Well, that's right. That's right. Public education is spread around the world for a reason, because the people in power know that if they can control the youth from the time that they are born, and you see the government always trying to get the youth earlier and earlier. Uncle Joe Stalin said, "Give me your young when they're born, and by the time they're teenagers, I'll have them for life."
But you're almost suggesting here, so you're suggesting that the U.S. government education is a bit of an indoctrination camp. That's kind of what you're saying without saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Now, you imagine that's an unpopular opinion.
That in some realms, yes. And you know, it was very unpopular to revolt against a king, too, until it wasn't. Until all of a sudden, 30% of the people decided that, I think we'll overthrow the king. And the king was overthrown. It's the idea of freedom and liberty that I talk about, is personal responsibility, and that you have to take that and seize that in order to be free. You cannot be free and be dependent. And we are all just so dependent. And now we fear the government that takes care of us. Everybody fears them. Think about not paying your taxes. Little beads of sweat will start coming out on your head for no reason at all, because they've indoctrinated you to believe it. And then the whole idea, taxes are what we pay in a civil society. Well, look at society now. Is it civil? No way, shape, or form. Anarchy is the only way. We may never attain it. I have no doubt that I will never see it in my lifetime. But if we're headed in the exact opposite direction, we're headed to a totalitarian nightmare where there are haves and the have-nots. And guess what? Me and you and everybody else around here are going to be the have-nots.
So what are you suggesting?
The battle is won 6 inches at a time. And the 6 inches are right in between your ears. We have to change hearts and minds. We have to get away from the idea that government can take care of every little problem, every little thing, and go back to personal responsibility and natural rights. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. I mean, you can judge every little law, rule, regulation that you want on that, and you don't need a whole bunch of lawyer legislators to dribble out some kind of legalese and then make it where you got to go around this way and all around just to figure out what the hell they're saying. Right. That seems like insanity to me. I think we're running in a world of insanity. And look at how much money they pour into education. Every time, government is the most wonderful thing when it comes to failure. Every time they fail, they get more money.
So let me stop you right here. You've talked about how you need to change the hearts and minds. All right, this mission of yours starts with changing hearts and minds.
It's not just me. but there are a lot of people.
So, but how is that push coming along? Let's just talk in Kershaw County alone, notwithstanding the rest of the state. I mean, what are you seeing numbers-wise? I mean, again, the Election Commission has confirmed they've never seen somebody so openly supportive of such a different idea as what you have here.
I'm not surprised with that. I'm not surprised at all, but the support is amazing. Amazing. We had a forum, the GOP had a forum Monday night.
Yeah, which we were there for.
That Fitz covered. And none of the other candidates would come. I don't know. I don't know whether they're scared of the ideas that I promote or not. But there were many times in there when I was explaining exactly what I'm telling you, that people were clapping and all. And afterwards, I was getting, I even had a retired judge come up that I've known for years. And he said, Jeff, that's unbelievable. You knocked it out the park. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. We have got to get back to the ideas of natural rights and stand upon that foundation that made us the most prosperous nation on the planet. And we've lost all that. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to find out what I'm all about, go to Jeff Maddox, Mattox, on YouTube, and look it up. And there's 500 videos in there. You can see the progression of thought all the way back from 2012 when I was running with Lee Bright against the Flimsy Graham, and he's still there.
Okay, well, notwithstanding Lindsey Graham, do you have any message to those who are registered to vote in Kershaw County? I mean, it seems like your opinions are so extreme. I don't know if there's just one sentence to say to convince people to change their minds in the events they are on the fence between government or anarchy.
Yeah. If I had to tell them anything, are you happy with the result that you've had up till now? If the answer is no, let's try something different. They've all the councils have been going the same direction for years and years and years, spending money on boondoggles and swamp parks. If you want to change, if you want a bull in a china shop, vote Jeff Maddox. Now, early voting's already commenced. It goes through the 2nd of August, and then August 6th is the big showdown. And we'll find out by 9 o'clock, August 6th, 9 p.m., we'll know if they choose freedom or they choose the same old, same old.
Well, folks, whether you're happy with your government or not, elections have consequences. And here in Kershaw County, we evidently have a very special election on our hands. So count on FITSNews to cover the results, whatever the people may decide. Jeff Maddox, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Andy, for having me.
America's population is getting older, yet at the same time, fewer young people are entering the nursing profession. Now, you don't have to be a math genius to recognize that doesn't add up. It's going to have serious impacts on our healthcare system moving forward. Now, here in South Carolina, a report issued just last year from the State Office for Healthcare Workforce revealed that the Palmetto State's nursing shortage is projected to be the 10th worst in the entire country. Now, what's to be done about it? This is an issue we covered extensively here at FITSNews, but to get an idea of what's happening on the front lines, we sat down with Chief Nursing Officer Melissa Taylor at Lexington Medical Center, one of the award-winning hospitals in the Midlands region of the state that is stepping up to the plate to confront this problem. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Melissa. I wanted to ask you, looking at this profession that obviously you've devoted 3.5 decades of your life to, talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that it's facing right now.
Yeah, well, I think there's always been challenges since I've been a nurse. We've had these ups and downs where you really have a nursing shortage, and then the nursing shortage has never totally gone away, but we've had periods throughout my career that's been better than others. So, I think right now the nursing shortage is the forefront of everybody's mind. I think, when you talk about challenges for the nursing staff, it's, having enough people. Patients are sicker than they used to be, especially, in the hospital. So patients that I was taking care of on a med-surg floor are being taken care of at home now, and patients, when I first started, that were in the ICUs are out on our med-surg floors. So the acuity of those patients has gotten harder, and so it's a challenging time for us. Our nurses are very well prepared, and they're very well prepared when they get to us, which is a nice thing to have, that we have a lot of good nursing programs in the state. But the shortage is probably the biggest thing that is our biggest challenge right now.
Let's talk about it a little bit. Obviously, we've got a population that's getting older.
Yes.
We have nursing school entry positions that are dropping. We've got a report here from South Carolina's own state government about how the state is poised to have the 10th worst nursing shortage in the entire country. Walk us through a little bit about why is this happening? Before we get into what's happening to address it, what is the reason behind the shortage?
We've mentioned a lot of it, and it's not one thing. The aging population, quite honestly, the growth in population, especially here in the state of South Carolina, and even more so in the Midlands, because we have a fast growing community here. So just the vast numbers of people. I think it's that nurses have other opportunities, which is not a bad thing, but years back when you came out of school, you had the option to work in the hospital, or you had an option to work in a physician network office. Nowadays, there's all kinds of opportunities. So there's nurses that are working for insurance companies and schools and, manufacturing companies. So there's a lot of different opportunities, telenursing, virtual nursing. So it takes those resources away from what you typically hear of people work, you have to work in a hospital before you can work anywhere else. That's no longer the case, and that's not a bad thing. It just means that we need to continue to grow our nursing workforce.
All right, that is a wrap for this week's edition of Your Week in Review. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in. I want to remind everybody, if you haven't already, please head over to FITSNews.com and give us a subscription. It's only $8 a month. All the coverage we provide, it empowers everything that we do to hold those in power accountable. A quick programming note, next week will be our live edition of the Month in Review. If you haven't checked this out, folks, you need to watch, if for no other reason than it's live. If we mess up or say something crazy, we can't cut it out, so it's always entertaining. But we'll have a ton to cover on that show, folks, particularly on the heels of the big Micah Miller court hearing in Horry County. For all of us here at FITSNews, I'm Will Folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time on Your Week in Review.